Hello, welcome to this culinary medicine cooking class. My name is Emily Clairmont. I'm a registered dietitian with the University of Vermont Medical Center in the Comprehensive Pain Program. Today's cooking class is on food sensitivities, the diet, and the kitchen. The way that the class will flow is that we will go over some information and then we'll dive into the recipe. I hope you found all the resources for this cooking class at my table. And so this is going to be the recipe, the shopping guide and equipment list, as well as education on the topic. I find that having these pieces of information can be really helpful for you in being successful with the recipe, as well as understanding the background of it. So culinary medicine is really the blending of the science of nutrition and the joy of cooking. So I hope that's what you encounter today with this cooking class. I have the ingredients for the recipe here, but like I said, first I just want to talk a little bit about food sensitivities and how we might approach them. So with food sensitivities, they can certainly have a big impact on our health. They can also be a little bit mysterious. So with food sensitivities or suspected food sensitivities, sometimes you might have been recommended to do an elimination diet. And this elimination diet, which it doesn't necessarily have to be one particular food, it could be multiple foods. It doesn't have to be a certain set of foods, it could be unique to you. So an elimination diet might be recommended to you to explore whether or not there is a relationship between the symptoms you're experiencing and the foods you're eating. The symptoms, what symptoms might be associated with behind a recommendation to do an elimination diet is really broad. Certainly it could be digestive, it could be skin complaints, it could be migraines, headaches, or it could also be related to pain and inflammation. In my world here, working at the Comprehensive Pain Program, I work with a lot of individuals doing various elimination diets to assess and to evaluate whether or not there is a relationship between what they're eating and how they feel. In terms of, like I said, what foods might be eliminated on an elimination diet, it's very broad. At a minimum, you might be recommended to do a 7-food elimination diet. This is pretty classic to assess or address food allergies, and these are going to be wheat, dairy, soy, egg, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, and fish. And more recently, perhaps they're going to add an 8th one onto that, which would be sesame. Sesame recently became the 8th most common food allergy. So, but it can go certainly beyond that, elimination diets. They can include or exclude alcohol, caffeine, sugar, beef and red meat, among many others. So really important to work with your healthcare practitioner, your registered dietitian, whomever is recommending that you do the elimination diet so that you have a clear idea of what you're eliminating, as well as having a clear idea of what you are eating. So that tends to be the biggest challenge with elimination diets is, okay, yes, I know I need to eliminate these, but what can I eat? So hopefully, and if it's not presented to you immediately, try and encourage your practitioner to help you understand what you can eat. And that is essentially where today's recipe comes in. It's a snack, it's a protein bar, plant-based, homemade, and certainly meets the needs of some of the most restrictive elimination diets. And I hear that often when people are trying to figure out, maybe they can figure out meal times, maybe they can, figure out breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but it's sometimes, what do we choose when we're on the run? And this is when oftentimes we rely on foods that are pre-made. However, unfortunately, a lot of those pre-made foods contain processed ingredients. A lot of them contain the ingredients that are most commonly wanting to be eliminated on an elimination diet: gluten, dairy, soy. So again, just dipping back into the world of elimination diets for a minute before we get into the recipe, I want to provide just information on how you go about doing an elimination diet. And I believe that and this is how I educate individuals, there's 4 main steps to an elimination diet. There is the planning, right, where you take the time to understand what you're trying to stay away from and what you can have. The next step is the actual elimination diet. So where you are eliminating the foods that are recommended to be eliminated. The third, and I'm going to say this is maybe the more challenging piece, is the reintroduction, right? When we reintroduce those foods that have been eliminated, the key there is that we reintroduce them one by one. The last phase of an elimination diet is essentially that long-term plan. Based on the results, based on what you learned from the reintroduction, elimination and reintroduction, that's going to help you decide what your long-term diet might look like. And to give you an idea of that timeline, give yourself a good week for planning. Take 2 weeks, take the amount of time that you need so that you're going into this with a good plan. It can be really tempting for us to say we're going to do an elimination diet and we're starting tomorrow because we're motivated. But if you can, capture that motivation so that you can hold it with you while you go through this planning piece. So give yourself 1 to 2 weeks for planning. The elimination diet, where we actually get these foods out of our diet, I encourage people 3 weeks at a minimum, up to 6 weeks. Going beyond 6 weeks, which can sometimes be something that people want to do, especially if they're feeling better, there's no known benefit of going longer than 6 weeks on that elimination diet. So wherever you're at in week 6, as long as it's been a thorough elimination diet, we can start to reintroduce. So in this reintroduction phase, it could take a week up to 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on the number of foods that you've eliminated. The recommendation is to reintroduce one food or food group at a time. So if you're reintroducing dairy, you don't need to introduce milk and then cheese and then yogurt. You could reintroduce all those, all that as dairy at once. But one food or food group over 3 days. Day 1 is 1 serving of that food. Day 2 is 2 servings. Day 3 is 3 servings of that food. Ideally, you're building up the amount of that food in your system. And then the last phase, I typically say about 3 to 6 months, what this long-term diet might look like. And the reason why I say 3 to 6 months and not the rest of your life, well, of course, there could be times where you say, absolutely never again am I gonna have that food, and that's perfectly fine. As long as it's, it's not restricting your diet, you're not missing nutrients from your body. But if we react to a particular food during the reintroduction phase, that's when we say, okay, I need to get this food out of my diet so that for 3 to 6 months, after which I'm going to try it again. I'm going to reintroduce it over that day 1, day 2, day 3 exercise, that style, and test it again. That will give you your body more of a chance, your immune system more of a chance to relax, to calm down, to reduce inflammation, for your gut to heal. And then you may be surprised 3 or 6 months from then, you might be able to tolerate that food just fine. For a lot of people, that's a really good thing, especially if it's a food that they enjoy often. So again, the education material is at my table. I encourage you to read it again. And so let's move into the recipe. So this is a recipe that like I said, is, intended as a snack, something that is homemade. Anything that we create at home, for the most part, from scratch, is going to be infinitely better for us than something that we buy pre-made. So this particular recipe has a lot of ingredients to it, but there are certain aspects of it that we can do in advance. This is something that we also talk about in culinary medicine, is energy conservation. And so it can be helpful for us to do certain parts of the recipe in advance so that we can conserve the energy, not burn ourselves out making one recipe. Another aspect of culinary medicine that we talk about all of the time is a concept called mise en place. Mise en place translates to everything in its place. And this is the idea of organizing our kitchen, organizing our workspace for the recipe that we're going to be cooking. And this, as you can see, I have placed all the ingredients on this baking sheet. So everything I need is here. I've gotten my pan out. I have another mixing bowl there. I have a mixing spoon over here. I have a nice clean workspace. This is going to prevent me from turning around, going to the fridge, back into the cupboards, needing to wash something. It's going to make this go a lot quicker. This mise en place is something that I could do. I could have done this yesterday. I could do it earlier this morning. And it sets me up to be more efficient when I actually get into the kitchen. We don't want to trip over anything. We don't want to burn ourselves out. And so let's see here. This ingredient, or this recipe, is called a seed and nut bar. And like I mentioned, it's plant-based, whole food, meaning that we're using whole ingredients. Some of the ingredients have been food processed to be a little bit smoother consistency. This is going to help that bar stick together. All right, so other ingredients, that the bar has, it includes pumpkin seeds, coconut, flaxseed, Brazil nuts, sunflower seeds, hemp seeds, chia seeds. I think all but sesame seeds are in here. Today I'm using a puffed rice cereal. That's going to give the bar some good crunch, but you can use other puffed grains as well. Puffed quinoa, puffed millet, really kind of whatever you're able to find and what is of interest to you. This particular recipe is gluten-free, dairy-free, and so it's up to you if you want to choose a gluten-containing grain or a gluten-free grain. Again, with the concept of this class being about food intolerances and food sensitivities, we really try to make a meal that would meet everybody's needs. Okay, so once we have everything together, like we do here, the recipe goes relatively quickly. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna bring a nice big mixing bowl in front of me. I'll grab my spoon, and then what we're going to do is in the pan, we're going to add the rice syrup. And I'm using rice syrup, which happens to be a really nice sweetener when it comes to this type of food. Rice is naturally high in starch, so as far as syrups go, it tends to be relatively sticky, and it's going to thin out when we have it on over the heat, and then it's going to harden up when it cools. So again, we're going to put the rice syrup, we're going to put the spices as well. We're going to put turmeric, we'll put some cardamom, we'll put vanilla extract, and we'll put a little bit of salt. And so could we use alternatives for the rice syrup? Yes. I'm going to turn on our hood fan. Which allows me to turn on the stove. And just over medium heat, we're just trying to get these ingredients together. We're trying to soften up the rice syrup as well as blend those really flavorful, colorful spices. So I was starting to say, could we use a different sweetener? Yes. We could do this with maple syrup. We could do this with honey. We could do this with agave nectar. Today I'm using the rice syrup because of its low allergen potential. So some individuals are sensitive to the carbohydrates in honey and agave, and for that reason I chose not to use it. And like I was saying earlier, with the rice syrup being relatively a nice thick and sticky consistency, that's why I'm choosing it over maple syrup today. And so this combination is going to make your kitchen smell incredible, and hopefully that means we're going to that's going to translate to these bars tasting incredible. So we'll let that warm up just a little bit. What I'll add in the mixing bowl is, this is chopped up, which I used a food processor for, and I just did it on pulse until I got a nice fine consistency, again something small enough to help the bars stick together. This is the Brazil nuts, the pumpkin seeds, the coconut, so we'll just pour that in. Today I'm using shaved coconut, and so I wanted it to be a little bit smaller. If you're cooking with shredded coconut, then that's probably small enough. That's why I mixed it in here. We'll add the hemp seeds. We'll add the sunflower seeds. We'll add the flax seed. And we'll add the puffed grain and the chia seed. And we'll give this a nice stir, just to mix everything up. Because it's going to move pretty quick once that rice syrup is up to temperature. If anybody's ever made like Rice Krispie treats at home, it moves about as fast as that. So we want to make sure that the rest of our ingredients are prepared and ready to go. So many of these ingredients are excellent sources of protein. Our pumpkin seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, hemp seed, our Brazil nuts, excellent sources of plant-based protein. We should not be too concerned about needing to get additional protein with this particular recipe. And that can be something that granola bars tend to miss, ones that are pre-made, they tend to be high in carbohydrates, naturally so if they're made with something like oat. But we need to also make sure, thinking of a balanced meal, making sure that we get not just carbohydrates, but protein to help balance out those carbohydrates, help us digest them. All right, so this looks good and hot. And so, like I said, once this comes off the stove and into the mixing pan here, we're gonna have to kind of move like the wind to make sure that this coats everything. So we can just pour it over. I don't know if you saw that, but almost immediately it started to thicken up on the rim of the pan. And so we just stir and stir and stir and mix and stir. So it's really important to know what you're comfortable with in the kitchen. This can be, especially the cooler it gets, it can be it can be hard work. As our chef educator says, you know, cooking is hard work. You know, if somebody makes it look easy, you know, there's something to that. So know what you're able to do. If you need somebody to help you kind of mix this, then that's a perfectly reasonable task to ask for help with. All right, so I had already prepped my sheet pan to place the bars into. I have parchment paper here so that it'll be a nice, easy cleanup. I also have another sheet of parchment paper to help press down once I pour it in the pan. All of this information in terms of things that we need to do in advance to be as efficient as possible with this recipe are on the handouts on my table. So, we've got it in the pan here. We're just going to push it out into the corners. You notice that I'm using a little quarter sheet pan. Let me turn this off. I'm using a little quarter sheet pan. You could use a little 8x8 baking pan. I've done this recipe before in a cast iron pan. I mean, it's really whatever you have. Maybe a Pyrex dish. And I don't know if you can see me pressing into this, but it sets up relatively quickly. You want to give it about a half an hour before you cut into it. All right, so we can use that sheet that we were using to press on it. We can use that just to cover it and place it aside. And so just like any other good cooking show, I did do this in advance so that we didn't have to wait half an hour to see what the results would look like. And so here they are, nice and pressed out, nice and flat, nice and smooth. And again, I absolutely just love parchment paper. And so what we can do is we can just lift this right out of the pan onto our cutting board. And then cut them right here. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but there's a very satisfying crunch that comes along with using the puffed rice. And that is going to translate into our mouths as well. So here we are, we have these lovely squares of really nutrient dense foods. So as you know, these are about as whole as you can get, with our rice syrup being the most processed ingredient here. The nutrients that are in this, like I was saying, is high protein. We're getting some carbohydrates from, of course, from the rice syrup as well as the puffed rice. We'll get a little bit of carbohydrates from the nuts and seeds, but mostly they're going to be giving us great sources of protein, great sources of fiber. For individuals that are interested in learning about anti-inflammatory diets, this recipe also includes pumpkin seeds and Brazil nuts. Pumpkin seeds are an excellent source of zinc, which is an essential nutrient for our immune system. Brazil nuts are an excellent source of selenium, again, an essential nutrient for our immune system. For individuals experiencing chronic pain, it has been demonstrated that those individuals tend to be low or deficient in zinc and selenium. So instead of reaching for a dietary supplement, perhaps we just try and get some more pumpkin seeds and Brazil nuts in our diet. And with the nut and seed bar, it can be an easy way to get those into your diet and into your body. I hope you have enjoyed this class. I hope you try the recipe at home, and I wish you well. Thank you.